Hello again, and thanks for tuning in to Ride Rescue. In this episode, I'm going to take the dash from the gray car, and I'm going to keep the red dash from the red car because that's the original padded dash. And I've shown that in previous videos where that dash has got a lot of cracks in it and it's shrunk up. I want to keep that dash so that I can restore it someday, so I'm just going to set that one aside. But for now, just to be able to get this car back together and get it on the road, I'm going to take the gray dash and I'll strip off all the foam and the padding, and then underneath that is the original style dash that they used on the lower grade cars, like the Catalina. The Catalina just had a metal dash. So it has a little bit of rust, it has some residue from the adhesive from that pad. So I'll clean that all up, get it primed, get it painted. I'll play around with some texture to it so that I can knock off the shine, because these original cars, when their dashboards were painted, they were a semi-gloss or a matte finish, so you didn't have that bright reflection when you're driving. So I'll experiment with ways to knock off that shine and smooth it out. And I want to kind of give it a little bit of a look of it being aged. I don't want it to look like it is freshly painted, brand new. You can see there's a little bit of residue from the foam where the original dash, the foam dash, was on this particular dashboard. But in some of the models, the lower end models in 1960, the dashboard was just painted. And then for the higher end models, like the Ventura and the Bonnevilles, they put a pad on it. So by just taking the pad off, you can see this is the original dash that would have been used on the lower end cars. And it does have some real fine surface rust. I'm just sanding that off with 180 grit sandpaper. And what's interesting is underneath this gray paint, this is actually the interior color of the parts car. There's no primer under this paint. I'm surprised. I expected some red oxide primer or just some regular gray primer, but that explains why there's so much rust. We'll get it all sanded and prepped, and I'll put a coat of primer on it and then sand the primer, and then we'll be ready to paint. I don't know if that was the adhesive that was on there, or it was just something sticky that has stuck the foam down. Since there's no other adhesive on here, I'm gonna assume there was something spilled and just really stuck that down. I'm spraying some CLR mixture, 50-50 CLR and water, kind of cut through some of this rust and this adhesive slash sticky stuff, whatever that is. I'll just use some Scotch-Brite pads, break through that rust. Yeah, and it's cutting right through it, so that's definitely going to help. This underside definitely has been sprayed with some adhesive. So I have some old reducer. When I say old, I mean really old. It's probably 25, 30 years old. Works good for cleaning up some parts. Typically we'll get off this adhesive. This adhesive is pretty old. It's going on 60 years old, so it might be baked on there pretty good. See if this cuts it off. What I'll do is I'll try to rub it in a little bit with some Scotch-Brite. That's doing the trick. Between the CLR and the reducer, stripped it completely to bare metal. So definitely will give a nice bite for the primer. I'll finish cleaning this up and then I'll get ready for primer. One of the reasons why I'm hanging the panel this way, I could just lay it flat on the table and put down some paper, but by hanging it, one, I can get to both sides really easily because there is a lip here that needs to be painted. But the second reason would be for surface area getting dust. I don't have the best dust-free paint booth since I'm just painting in my garage. So by hanging the parts from its edge, I got less area where I can get any dust specks in it. The type of paint that I'm using with this with some heavy solids and some hardener, I can buff out those scratches. And this dash, I don't want it shiny anyway, so I'm planning on sanding this down with 1000 grit paper and then sanding it one more time with 2000 or 5000 and then leaving it that way. I won't polish it back up. So it's all wiped down with surface wash. And I've wiped it down with a tack cloth. So now I'll put a fairly decent coat, maybe 2 light coats of primer. Once that cures, then I'll finish sanding it so that I can sand out all of the sand scratch and level out these rust areas. I'll put a little bit of rust sealer on those areas and then seal it up with a final coat of primer. I'm using a urethane primer. I could use an epoxy primer that would seal it up even better, but the epoxy primer takes several days to dry. It's a long, long process for them to dry, and I don't have the patience or the time for that, so I'll use the urethane and it'll dry much quicker. I'm going to use my small Harbor Freight detail gun for priming this. I haven't used a primer in this before because it does have a small tip, but I'm thinning the primer down quite a bit, so the little gun and a little tip should be fine, but this will be a good test. I've used this little detail gun a lot for regular paint, but this is the first for primer. There's a couple of ways I can sand this dash. Since I'm planning on using a satin finish instead of a high gloss finish, I could just use a Scotch-Brite pad and rub it down. But this primer that I use is pretty hard, and I'm not going to get a really good quality, really smooth finish. I'm looking across this, even in a satin, I don't want to have a lumpy look or an orange peel look. I want it to be as smooth as possible. So I'm going to sand it with 400 grit sandpaper. I'm not going to use a sand block because as long as I do a cross hatch and I don't run my fingers in the same spot, I won't have to worry about any highs and lows. I should be able to keep it fairly smooth. Looks good, feels good. Moving on. So what I'm going to try to do is, I have the paint that matches the car, which is really close to the dash of the car, for the main dash. The top of the dash that I'm going to paint now is actually a burgundy or a maroon color instead of this. This is kind of a maroon, but it's more of a, I don't know, a red chili pepper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the paint from my Buick, which is a dark burgundy, and I'm going to mix the two together. I'm going to play around with it just a little bit and see if I can come up with a color that closely matches the seats and the original padded dash. You can see that's pretty dark. It almost looks black when it's wet. I want to toy around with it, so I'm just going to use small amounts while I play with it. So I'm not mixing up too much. I'm going to start with 1/8 of a cup. So it's probably hard to tell from the video, but this is the burgundy that I'm trying to match. It's close. It's darker than the red, the original red, but it's not quite dark enough. I'm going to go just a little bit more. Pretty scientific. Hey, but if you get results, a little bit darker. At this point, I have to make enough, because to remake this in this scientific manner, I'm not going to be able to match it. So I got to make sure I have enough paint to get this whole dash painted. I think I got it this time. So I hope this shows as good on camera lens. But yeah. Pretty amazing that I can pick up some used paint and mix it together, and looks like I've come up with something close enough. I'm happy. Well, what do you think? I call it a wrap. Before I wrap this up, let's grab that door panel and see what it looks like. As you can see, the door panel takes on a little bit of a purple tone. But if I knock the gloss off of that, I think the color will be pretty close. It's definitely closer than the original red that I started with when I started mixing it. But, it turned out so good, I might just leave it high gloss for a while. If the sun doesn't drive me crazy after a few drives, I can always knock the shine off. So yeah, it's a wrap. Thank you for tuning into my channel. I've got more videos coming up on this car, so I really appreciate you watching. Appreciate you giving me a like, leave me a comment. We'll see you again soon.